January 1968. The hills of northwest Vietnam glowed red beneath the morning sun, not with fire, but with the strange, iron-rich soil that coated everything. Khe Sanh Combat Base sat atop that barren plateau like a scar on the earth. To the 6,000 Marines stationed there, it felt less like a post and more like a trap. Beyond the perimeter, the jungle rose in all directions, thick and dark, hiding what everyone knew was coming. Khe Sanh was a lonely outpost near the Laotian border, surrounded by mist and silence. The only road in was barely passable, the airfield cratered from months of harassment fire. Yet it was vital, a symbol of American resolve and a potential launch point to block North Vietnamese supply lines running along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Washington wanted it held at any cost. Hanoi wanted it erased. For weeks, small patrols vanished into the jungle and never returned. Artillery rounds landed at random, testing the perimeter, measuring response time. At night, the Marines could see faint flashes on the distant hills, muzzle fire from unseen guns. Intelligence reports spoke of divisions moving into the area, entire regiments disappearing into the valleys. But inside the wire, the days felt almost normal. Men played cards, patched bunkers, joked over rations. Routine was the only defence against dread. Then the signs became impossible to ignore. Recon flights spotted trench networks creeping toward the base like veins under the earth. Enemy artillery appeared on the ridges, their barrels camouflaged with leaves. The North Vietnamese army was not hiding anymore. They were preparing. The plateau became a stage, and every Marine could feel the tension building. Shells landed closer each day. The smell of burned powder hung over the camp. The sky, once a calm blue, grew heavy with storm clouds and the thump of distant guns. It was no longer a question of if they would be attacked, but when. Some of the older Marines whispered that Khe Sanh would be another Dien Bien Phu, the French base destroyed in a similar siege 14 years earlier. No one said it openly, but the comparison haunted every officer. The North Vietnamese had studied that battle. They had learned from it. By mid-January, the hills around Khe Sanh were alive with unseen movement. The jungle swallowed sound, yet at night men swore they could hear footsteps beyond the wire, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Floodlights swept the perimeter, cutting through the fog to reveal only red earth and shadow. The calm before the storm stretched on for days, too long, too quiet. Then one night, the silence broke. A flare burst above the southern ridge, lighting the base in ghostly white. The sound that followed rolled like thunder, the first shells of the siege. The plateau of red earth erupted into chaos. The siege of Khe Sanh had begun. Before dawn on January 21st, 1968, the first barrage struck Khe Sanh with the fury of an earthquake. Rockets and mortars screamed down from the hills, exploding across the base in waves. Bunkers collapsed. Fuel drums ignited. The airfield, the Marines' only lifeline, vanished under a storm of fire and dust. In seconds, the plateau turned into a living inferno. Communication lines were shredded. The first radio calls were nothing but static and panic. Men scrambled from burning tents, diving into foxholes that were already filling with smoke. Shells landed so thick and fast that no one could tell where the explosions ended and the echoes began. When the barrage finally paused, the silence was worse than the noise. The base was unrecognisable, a shattered maze of craters, burning vehicles, and bodies half buried in red mud. A single ammunition bunker had taken a direct hit, sending a mushroom of flame hundreds of feet high. For miles, the jungle glowed with the reflection. Within hours, the siege tightened. Every road in and out was cut off. Enemy artillery now had the base completely zeroed in. The hills were alive with North Vietnamese troops, but none could be seen. They moved like ghosts, invisible by day, deadly by night. Patrols sent beyond the perimeter rarely made it back. The Marines adapted fast. They stopped walking above ground unless absolutely necessary. They slept in bunkers, ate in trenches, fought from the mud. Every inch of Khe Sanh was dug into the earth, not by choice, but by survival. Men carried their rifles even when sleeping, knowing that another shell could fall at any moment. Food became a precious commodity. Water came in dented canisters dropped by air. Mail arrived soaked in mud. Each day blurred into the next. Smoke, noise, exhaustion. The phrase incoming became as common as good morning. From the hills, North Vietnamese guns fired with mechanical precision. Some shells landed so close to the same spot that Marines joked the enemy must have drawn a map of the base. Yet the humour was hollow. Casualties grew daily. Corpsmen worked non-stop, their hands covered in blood and dirt. There was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. Helicopters tried to bring supplies, but the landing zone was a death trap. Pilots came in low and fast, dodging flak to drop crates before veering away. Many never made it out. The sky itself seemed to burn. The Marines called it the Ring of Fire. They were surrounded, outnumbered and isolated, but they still held the line. As night fell, the plateau flickered with muzzle flashes. The defenders fired into the dark, unsure what they were hitting. The wind carried the smell of cordite and the distant sound of chanting. North Vietnamese soldiers shouting into the night, reminding the Marines that they were trapped. The siege was no longer just a battle. It was a test of endurance, a slow, grinding struggle to see who would break first. The men of Khe Sanh were determined it wouldn't be them. By the third week of the siege, Khe Sanh was no longer a base. It was a cratered island in a sea of fire. The Marines below the surface lived like moles, their bunkers carved into the red dirt, their world reduced to mud, smoke and vibration. Every day was the same rhythm. Artillery at dawn, airstrikes at noon, flares at night. Above ground, nothing lived. The only thing keeping Khe Sanh alive was the sky. Every crate of ammunition, every meal, every drop of water, it all came from the air. The supply line was a miracle and a nightmare. Cargo planes flew through walls of flak and rockets, dropping their loads from low altitude while tracers climbed toward them like fireflies from hell. Many were hit before they even reached the plateau. Some exploded mid-air, scattering supplies across the jungle. The Marines called it the Sky Bridge. Without it, they knew the base would die in days, but the pilots flying those missions called it something else, a one-way ticket. The airfield at Khe Sanh was barely usable. The runway was cratered, blackened and lined with wrecked planes that never made it out. Engineers patched it every night under fire, filling holes with sandbags and shattered steel. The next morning it would be bombed again. Each landing was a gamble. Some planes came in on one engine, sliding sideways through debris. Others hit too hard and burst into flames, killing crews before anyone could reach them. Above the smoke, the roar of B-52 bombers never stopped. They flew in from Guam and Thailand, releasing thousands of tons of explosives around the perimeter. The earth shook so violently that Marines said it felt like standing on the deck of a ship during a storm. Each wave of bombing was meant to crush the North Vietnamese positions, but for every trench destroyed, another appeared overnight. The enemy seemed endless, rebuilding faster than bombs could fall. Inside the base, the Marines measured time not by days, but by resupply drops. A good drop meant survival. A missed one meant hunger. Parachutes filled the air like ghostly blossoms, white for food, red for ammo, blue for medical supplies. Some drifted into enemy lines, others burst open on impact. Men risked their lives to recover them, sprinting into shellfire to grab what they could before the next barrage began. Sleep was a memory, fear was constant, but discipline held. Every man at Khe Sanh understood that his endurance mattered more than his weapon. The trenches had become home, wet, claustrophobic and filled with rats, but they also meant life. From the outside, the siege looked hopeless. From the inside, it was pure willpower. The Marines fought not for ground, but for each other. By February, more bombs had been dropped on Khe Sanh than any single location in all of World War II. And still, the base stood. The Sky Bridge held. The Red Plateau still belonged to the Marines, barely, but enough. By early March 1968, Khe Sanh had become the most bombed patch of ground on the planet. The hills around the base were torn apart by airstrikes, yet the enemy kept coming. Trenches crept closer each night, shallow scars across the red earth, inching toward the perimeter like a living thing. The Marines could see them now with the naked eye, zigzagging through the mist. They knew what it meant. The final assault was coming. Life inside the wire had become a strange rhythm of chaos and numbness. Shells fell so often that men stopped flinching at the sound. The air stank of fuel, sweat and burned metal. Sandbags rotted from the rain. Corpsmen worked in dim bunkers lit by flashlights, treating the wounded while more shells thudded above their heads. Some Marines had been awake for days, running on caffeine, fear and instinct. Letters from home sat unopened, too muddy to read. Food came cold and half-burned. The few hours of sleep they managed were filled with dreams of falling bombs. Every man carried his weapon even in sleep, his hand wrapped around it like a lifeline. Then the shelling intensified again, heavier than ever before. The ground shook for hours. Bunkers collapsed. A direct hit buried an entire squad alive, their cries muffled by dirt before rescuers could dig them out. Others were wounded by fragments that seemed to come from nowhere. The noise never stopped long enough to think. In the command bunker, officers tracked the enemy's movements through a haze of dust and radio chatter. Reports came in of attacks on the outer hills, Hill 881, Hill 861, and smaller outposts that guarded the approaches. Some were overrun, retaken, and lost again. Men fought hand-to-hand in trenches, bayonets flashing through the smoke. The lines blurred between attack and defence. Khe Sanh was running out of room to fight. The perimeter was shrinking, the jungle closing in. The North Vietnamese had built tunnels beneath the hills, allowing them to appear from nowhere, strike, and vanish. Each attack came closer than the last. Some nights, flares revealed figures crawling just yards from the wire before disappearing into the dark again. Still, the Marines refused to yield. Reinforcements from nearby bases tried to break through, but the jungle roads were death traps, mined, ambushed, and blocked by destroyed vehicles. Supplies came only by parachute now. Inside the base, the men stopped asking how long it would last. They already knew the answer, as long as it took. By late March, the air support reached its peak. B-52s carpet-bombed the hills so relentlessly that the mountain ridges themselves seemed to melt. Artillery from neighbouring bases joined in, firing night and day until the barrels glowed red. The roar of battle became constant, an endless storm of fire, dust, and exhaustion. And then, just as suddenly, it began to fade. The shelling stopped. The jungle fell silent again. The Marines waited, rifles ready, hearts pounding. But no attack came. The siege had broken, not by surrender or escape, but by sheer endurance. After 77 days of fire and fear, Khe Sanh still stood, barely breathing, but unbroken. April 1968. When the smoke finally lifted, Khe Sanh was almost gone. What had once been a military base now looked like the surface of another planet, blackened, cratered, and lifeless. The air was thick with the stench of burned metal and earth. Every step sank into mud mixed with ash. The sandbags were shredded, the bunkers caved in, the airstrip a jagged scar across the plateau. Yet in that wasteland the Marines were still there. They walked out of the bunkers like ghosts, hollow-eyed, skin pale under a layer of red dust, uniforms torn and stained by smoke. Many had not seen sunlight in weeks. Their voices were hoarse from breathing gunpowder. They had lived through 77 days of unrelenting fire, surrounded and outnumbered, and somehow held their ground. The world called it a victory. To those who survived, it felt more like survival. When reporters arrived after the siege, they could hardly believe what they saw. The base was obliterated, yet men still moved among the ruins, repairing trenches, carrying the wounded, cleaning weapons as if the fight could start again at any moment. Every crater told a story, a bunker that once held a squad, a trench that had become a grave, a position fought for and retaken a dozen times. The scale of destruction was unimaginable. Entire hills had been erased by bombing. The jungle around Khe Sanh was flattened for miles. Even from the air it looked like a wound that would never heal. But despite the devastation, the flag still flew, tattered, blackened by smoke, but standing. Weeks later the official word came down. The base would be abandoned. After months of blood and endurance, Khe Sanh was no longer considered strategically necessary. The Marines packed their gear and prepared to leave. For many, it felt like betrayal, to hold this ground through the worst firestorm of the war, only to give it up without a fight. But orders were orders. When the last convoys rolled out, they left behind a landscape of silence. The Red Plateau, once alive with gunfire and roaring engines, became still again. The jungle began to reclaim it, inch by inch, root by root. Rain filled the craters. Grass grew over the trenches. The scars of battle faded, but they never truly vanished. For those who fought there, Khe Sanh remained a memory carved into their bones. They remembered the taste of dust, the trembling earth, the endless noise, and the faces of men who never came home. It was not a battle for territory or victory. It was a test of the human spirit, the kind that leaves no glory, only survival. Years later, travellers found the old base almost invisible beneath the green. The village nearby had returned, rebuilt from the ashes, its people farming the same red earth that once drank the blood of thousands. The war moved on. The world forgot. But Khe Sanh remained, not as a base, but as a ghost story told by those who were there. And for the Marines who lived through it, the memory never left. They had looked into the heart of hell and walked out alive. That was enough. If you made it this far, thank you for walking this road with us. If you love stories like this, true stories about courage, endurance and forgotten history, make sure to subscribe, hit like and tap the hype button so more people can discover them too. Until next time, keep your head low, your spirit high, and remember the battle that refused to be forgotten.